Siskel and Ebert, TV's premier critics. Even with decades of film critics that have come after, these two men, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, remain among the best remembered and most talked about professional paid reviewers in the industry. The main reason for that is for about 23 years, they appeared on millions and millions of America's TV screens every week, reviewing most of the major films that were about to be released. For many people, they were the only actual critics they would trust, or even take note of. At one point in time, these two men were incredibly omnipresent. Between their annual Christmas specials, hosting their own versions of the Oscars, appearances together in late-night talk shows, cartoon guest star roles, parodies, you name it. It wasn't hard to turn on the TV and not see Siskel and Ebert somewhere. They covered the whole spectrum, and the term film critic was practically synonymous with them. Both came from the world of films, but from different backgrounds. Gene was the more casual critic whose favorite movie was Saturday Night Fever, while Roger was the intellectual essay writer who really loved to delve deep into the analysis of film. Together they formed one of TV's most memorable odd couples. What was great about them is that while the idea of two seemingly boring dudes reviewing movies every week sounds like it could get pretty dull fast, Siskel and Ebert made up for it with their often conflicting and dissimilar personalities. These were two people who were not afraid to be way more than once at odds with each other. Even if you didn't agree with what they were saying, Gene and Roger had such a way with words that more often than not, they were captivating. Even as the seating areas changed, the reviews got shorter, you still wanted to hear these two men talk about movies. Siskel and Ebert gave thumbs up or thumbs down to a lot of movies, but just as often as they agreed on something, they disagreed just as much. Sometimes these disagreements were as minor as Gene didn't like the movie, while Roger gave it a moderate thumbs up because he found it pleasant enough. But that's not what we're here to talk about, because when they disagreed on something, boy did they disagree. To celebrate them, and maybe not so coincidentally, the 10th anniversary of Roger Ebert's passing, I'm going to count down 10 of my favorite examples of Siskel and Ebert disagreeing so much on a movie, to the point where it ended in figurative punching for the two of them. Buckle up, folks, and please remember to hit that subscribe button down below. Say 2 thumbs up to this channel, because I've got to put on my referee cap and shirt just to keep the fighting under control. Anyway, let's get started. We start this list off with a less infamous split review, but still a pretty heated debate. Their review of the 1996 family comedy, Bogus. Gene starts this one out. He's not a fan of the movie. His argument against the film, which stars Whoopi Goldberg as an unexpected recent caretaker of a child and features an imaginary friend, is that he doesn't find it believable that Goldberg's character would be so selfish and cruel towards this kid she has to take care of. Hey Gene, haven't you heard? People can be nasty too. Ebert, however, thinks that the movie is sweet and charming. He also rallies against Gene's points by noting that if he suddenly learned he had to take care of a kid at 40, that he not only wouldn't take the news particularly well, but would act like a grump about it. Gene fights back, arguing that this proves that the movie was poorly done.
It's Whoopi Goldberg, one of the sweetest
This isn't the movie that was made. That's not the movie that was made.
And that's why it's badly made.
I think it'd be better if you reviewed the movies that are made rather than your rewrite.
Roger.
Vicious comeback, Roger. This entire episode, which has a decent number of split votes, including the Island of Dr. Moreau and the Trigger Effect, feels like the two are really getting at each other's throats. At this point, coming off more like a bickering couple than a pair of professional critics. However, somehow, of all things, it's Bogus, a forgotten Whoopi Goldberg family comedy which starts the episode that stands out in my mind as the archetypical Siskel and Ebert nasty argument. The fact that this is the movie that gets them worked up the most is a wonderfully tinged thing. So, what could beat that argument? Well... For this next entry, I was initially torn between 2 reviews from the same franchise, Rocky IV and Rocky V. However, while Gene liked both films and Ebert didn't, Siskel was far more enthusiastic towards Rocky IV, so it ultimately won out. Gene liked Rocky IV so much that even Ebert was surprised, and not in a good way, I might add. This review is from the pre-At the Movies era, when they were still reviewing films in a dark room. Don't let that fool you though. Ebert is an absolute savage here, saying that Gene is a madman for liking this glitch-ridden mess of a film. He then complains about all those varying cliches, to which Gene responds, if Ebert at least thought that the villain of the film, Ivan Drago, was good.
He's a moderately interesting villain.
That's a secret code word for him saying, no, he's not. The two proceed to end the review in typical Siskel and Ebert heavy split fashion by slashing each other's throats. This is Siskel and Ebert at their absolute best. Just two people on the opposite end of the army, and in no way is either one going to change the other's opinion, no matter how technically correct one or the other might be. The emotions are just too darn high. Alright, next please.
Because he can make another great villain. I want Rocky V. I don't want Rocky V. Please don't give me Rocky V. I thought you'd rather have Halloween 5. I wouldn't rather have Halloween 5, and I don't want Friday the 13th 5.
Last year, late year period Siskel and Ebert is unfortunately not the best. Because of Gene's surgery, the energy is just not the same. I was initially considering their openly strange review of Armageddon, where they both thought that the movie was stupid, but Gene enjoyed the stupidness enough to recommend it. Sadly though, Gene doesn't sound the best there. However, instead I did manage to squeeze in this late period gem, the review of 1998's Mulan. Ebert starts out this review praising the film, calling it a fresh, original, and adventurous Disney animated feature. He's completely on board with the film. Sounds great, but oh, just wait till you get to Gene's opinion, because he's not nearly as enthused as Roger is. Gene doesn't get behind it at all, his main complaint being that he finds Mulan to be a weak protagonist, comparing her to Ariel in The Little Mermaid, Belle in Beauty and the Beast, Barbra Streisand in Yentl, and for some reason, Demi Moore in G.I. Jane.
You know, for kids.
Gene's being too much of a stickler here, if I'm being honest, putting maybe a bit too much rationale into an animated feature, and Ebert rightfully puts him in his place. His obsession in comparison to The Little Mermaid, while reasonable, does seem to be a bit overdone.
You did the same thing. You know where you did it? When you said the songs weren't good, because the songs in these other pictures were spectacular.
Well, that's what I said.
This is a good late period Siskel and Ebert, because while the argument is kind of theoretically insane to a point, at least Gene gives his reasons for not being as enthused about the film as he would like to be, while Ebert just responds to Gene giving the movie a thumbs down by handing out the biggest cold shoulder possible. It's what you would expect from two critics who regularly like to tear each other's throats out. However, it's only number 8. Anyway, Siskel and Ebert are both critics who would probably be the first to admit that they're very squeamish when it comes to violence or gross out in films. I mean, just take a gander at Ebert's review of John Carpenter's The Thing. They're also generally very critical of movies that promote, or at least attempt to show a lot of direct violence, even sometimes seemingly bordering on, to a lot of people, as coming off as being hypocritical. A good example of this being during the early days of their second program, Sneak Previews. They did an entire show dedicated to trashing the trend of slasher movies. That's why when both of them or one or the other actually enjoys a movie that is intentionally trying to be subversive and or weird, it can make for an interesting dichotomy, especially when they disagree on the approach. Take their review of the 1989 cult horror comedy Parents. Ebert starts this one out saying he didn't enjoy the movie, just finding it disturbingly creepy and not fun in any particular way. However, Gene surprises him and the audience by saying that he actually enjoyed it. Gene likes the movie because to him it has a real sense of humor. Well, it's supposed to be a comedy, so I hope there are jokes. And that the film perfectly captures the mindset of a child being horrified by the adult world. Roger doesn't really agree with him, but also he didn't hate the movie. To him, it's more like just a big old meh. This is a less talked about Siskel and Ebert debate, but it's still fun to look at two critics having differing opinions on potentially hard subject matter. Unlike some of the other films on this list, the two aren't disagreeing to such a strong level that they probably like to trip the other out. No, instead this is more of a brief nuanced discussion about content and intent with tone. Gene thinks it's funny because he understood what they were going for. Roger didn't because he thought it was too much. A lot of critics in general can sometimes be a bit too hard on certain kinds of films. There's a fine line between something being strange and just being quite frankly off-putting. Gene also ends his review with this little take.
I think this will be a cult film. Coming up next.
And the grand prize for being absolutely on the ball with their future take goes to Mr. Gene Siskel. Siskel and Ebert disagreed on a lot of big blockbusters. And you know what franchise they disagreed with the most? The Batman movies. Yep, Gene and Roger were split on 3 of the first 4 live-action Batmans. While they both went hard against Batman and Robin, as any normal person should, the first Batman really shows the strong extent to which the critics approach things differently. Gene opens the review saying he was dazzled by the performances and the visuals. While Ebert could respect those elements, he wanted a whole lot more out of the film. He found that the story and the characters were severely lacking. Nicholson's Joker in particular, he thought, dominated the film too much. Well, when you hire Jack Nicholson, it's either for a glorified cameo or use him as much as possible, so I don't see what he's complaining about. Gene responds saying that he found a lot of the elements interesting, specifically referencing the fact that Bruce is such a conflicted character in the film. This is a great Siskel and Ebert argument. On the one hand, Gene is absolutely into the feel and spectacle of the movie, and thinks it's better than most of the big movies he's seen that summer, 1989 by the way, while on the other side, Ebert, par for the course, is all about the characters, and on that front, the movie disappointed him heavily. During this review, there is no direct hostility happening here between the two hosts, but you can tell they are majorly disagreeing on just about every aspect of the film, and they are trying to one-up the other in direct confrontational questions as a result.
Right. Well, anyone can see that it's Michael Keaton,
right.
But the whole deal in the movie is that you're not supposed to notice that until the person takes off the mask and you say, oh my God, it's Bruce Wayne. Right, so she didn't know.
The only thing they can really agree on is the art direction, which is what every critic praised the film for at the time. So not a unique take. It all makes for one short, great experience that proves the age-old point that critics don't have to 100% agree with the general public when it comes to something that's massive. Siskel and Ebert may have not seen eye to eye on Batman, but somehow that's not even the biggest argument they've ever had. With that in mind...
Gene, if you're so good at telling me I had a better time and what I felt and how I thought, I don't know why it's necessary for me to be here on this show.
I've thought about that too.
Obviously, I'm wrong about my opinions, and you know exactly what I really thought.
But...
The list of movies that Siskel and Ebert have given completely opposite grades to is actually not as much as you might think. There were major disagreements over the years, but usually not to such a large vitriolic extent. However, one such example where their grades differed extremely high, and in a literal 3.5 star and 1 star sort of fashion, was the review for the cult comedy Kids in the Hall Brain Candy. This one's great because Gene starts out the review calling the film a clever and audacious satire, saying it had a lot of good jokes, and that he really enjoyed himself. However, when he finishes his little review, there's Ebert standing over in the corner, and boy does he not only not look amused, but perplexed.
The movie was awful,
Oh, no, Roger.
dreadful,
No.
terrible,
No.
stupid, idiotic,
No.
unfunny,
No.
labored, forced,
Oh, Roger.
painful,
Roger, this is
bad.
What happened to your sense of humor?
I know they say comedy is a matter of taste, but this might be going a bit too far. Ebert's response here is just absolutely brutal. Gene is just as perplexed as the audience is, and his incredible "oh no" Roger response is something to behold.
When they're not funny, I'm saying obviously
they're drag and they're
laughing.
not funny.
You didn't get the stuff about the drug and...
Oh, I caught on.
This is the kind of rare Siskel and Ebert disagreement where not only do they not agree on the movie, but they are on completely diametrically opposed sides about it. This isn't just a little bout, it's the definition of a slugfest. And for what it's supposed to be, a silly comedy, that one of them thought was greatly funny, while the other didn't even chuckle once at all, it's utterly remarkable. I've heard about this review beforehand, and boy, looking at it again, it doesn't disappoint. This is what Siskel and Ebert were all about.
Candy, Roger. Brain candy.
I wish some
Check
for
it
you,
out.
Gene.
Check it out.
I think
No,
you've
no,
been
no.
taking too much of it.
Here we have one of the stranger and probably more confusing of Siskel and Ebert's split thumbs to the 1995 wannabe Jurassic Park adventure film Congo. Gene starts out this review absolutely crushing the film, calling it incompetent and unintentionally funny, especially with how it handles its cast of characters. Once Gene finishes his thoughts and a slightly shocking turn of events, Ebert responds by saying that he thought the entire film was intentional comedy, especially because of the movie's characterizations. To him, there's no way that female gorilla sign language voice was meant to be anything but silly. Hey, good on Raj. Sometimes it's fine to like a movie just because it's dumb fun. Remember, this is the same man who gave 3 stars to Deep Blue Sea and 3.5 stars to Anaconda. So even though Ebert usually loved movies about strong characters, he knows a thing or two about a good silly old-fashioned monster movie. The look on Siskel's face says it all. This man is having none of it, and he can't believe his own longtime on-screen partner actually enjoyed this movie on a not unironic level, enough to give it a serious thumbs up.
Ernie Hudson was fabulous as the guide. He reminded me of Clark Gable in the way that he handled this role, the way that he balanced humor with kind of a bemused detachment. Now you talk about.
I thought I heard it all.
Let's keep.
You are correct, sir. Yes.
There's just something super fun to these old Siskel and Ebert reviews, where you can see them arguing about a movie in real time. It's enough to make a man want to go to the jungle. Roger Ebert is infamous for giving some popular movies thumbs down. Of course, he's a critic and he shouldn't force himself to popular consent. It's his opinion. That being said, there are some times where he dislikes a movie because he focuses too much on a particular aspect. One such example is his infamous review of Blue Velvet, where he, to be quite frank, kind of missed the point of the film, putting too much emphasis on the Isabella Rossellini character being poorly treated and just not accepting the general vibe. So how did the Siskel and Ebert segment on this movie go? Well, exactly what you'd expect.
An experience which is challenging, shocking, but mesmerizing, and I like the picture.
Well, first of all, I don't think I'm on the wrong tack with Isabella Rossellini.
This one's an absolute classic, though for all the wrong reasons. Roger does start this review, and off the bat he goes full force. He just finds the movie unnecessarily cruel, and the dialogue to be really campy. Gene disagrees, as he finds it to be a fascinating portrait of the nasty side of suburbia. Look, I love Roger Ebert's style of writing as much as the next guy, but occasionally he could be prone to getting too worked up over a movie. I mean, he's only human after all. It's fine if somebody can't take Lynch's style. It's not for everyone. But Ebert goes a bit too much in the surreal and sensitive side about Blue Velvet. Gene takes him to task for it, and he's absolutely in the right here.
Why is it a comedy?
Because he wants to set you up. He's a director, and he wants to play you like all the directors, the great directors want to do. He wants to play you like a piano.
This review is less of a Siskel and Ebert insult face-off, and more of an actual heated debate between the two. Even if I disagree with Roger in this particular context, it's really interesting and kind of fascinating how much he won't let go of his major grievance about the film. Siskel and Ebert revisited this film a number of times. Here they are talking about their earlier feud in the episode You Blew It in 1990. A lot of their argument was unsurprisingly exactly the same, except this time Ebert may have thought of the movie just a tiny bit better.
You know, there hasn't been a film in years that has given me more cause for thought about my feelings about it than Blue Velvet. Right. Obviously, David Lynch is a very good director. Obviously, Blue Velvet is a very well-directed film. I must admire the craftsmanship and the artistry in the film.
Ebert eventually came around to David Lynch as a director, but he still lingered on with his take that Blue Velvet was a very well-made film, but with what one would describe as having reprehensible content. Siskel and Ebert. If there's anything they're good at, it's begrudgingly accepting a film's quality.
We have a tie.
Now this might be considered a bit of a cheat, but both of these reviews are from the same episode, and both of them are instrumentally linked together. This is in spite of the fact that both of them are opposite films in terms of their targeted demographic, because Gene likes one and Roger likes the other. Oh yeah, it's that time again. Gene likes the more adult-oriented feature, and Roger defends the family film. So, one of the more infamous Siskel and Ebert reviews, and Ebert regular reviews in general, is the time he responded coldly to Full Metal Jacket. In the Roger-led Full Metal Jacket review, Ebert starts out by saying that while he found a lot to admire about Full Metal Jacket, he thought too much of it came off as routine war stuff, and it was a much less impressive version of the years previously released Platoon. As you might imagine, Gene, who thinks it's a great war film, is pretty obviously not amused. He got way more out of it than Ebert, finding the combat footage to be incredible, and the actual film's strength lying in its approach to the exhilaration of war and also the fear of dying that comes with it. Roger responds by stating that the war scenes reminded him too much of a Republic Type B picture. That's an Ebert pull if I ever saw one, and that after a while he just found the entire thing to be incredibly routine. Naturally, as you might expect, he starts comparing it to every major Vietnam War film that came before it.
Later, the others come up behind, and we can clearly see where the sniper is. Then when you get to that reverse shot and he pushes in, that is a cliche, Gene. I mean, when I saw that push, I was so disappointed in Kubrick.
Gene obviously finds that absurd, and the shouting that is on display here alone from his response is worthy of a gold medal.
Well, then in that case, you're going to love The Late Show, because they have kills like that every night in black and white, starring John Wayne, starting about midnight.
But they don't have movies like this film, Full Metal Jacket.
I disagree.
Now, if you thought that was a rowdy Siskel and Ebert fight, that's nothing when compared to, say, their widely diverging takes on, of all things, Benji the Hunted. Yes, Roger Ebert was the man who gave thumbs down to Full Metal Jacket, but I actually recommended Benji the Hunted. One of Roger Ebert's best attributes as a film critic was that he was generally good at looking at films from their intended target demographic. So while Full Metal Jacket is objectively the better film, he graded Benji the Hunted higher because he thought that it worked as an actual movie for families and kids. Gene starts out this segment by saying that while there are cute baby cougars in Benji the Hunted, he wishes there were even more scenes of them, because it isn't enough to salvage a movie where there's too much repetitive, tiresome chases going on.
This is the first time I wanted to tell a dog to slow down and stop to smell the flowers.
Ebert goes straight to Gene, and in his typical Ebert belief of reviewing movies for their intended target audience, he balks at Gene's review, calling it too adult-minded and cynical, not taking the film's intended audience of kids into consideration, because they'll probably really enjoy the little animals, yes, and the nature photography, and maybe not as much.
It's a movie that kids would really enjoy.
No,
really
you know what they should see? Roger, my rebuttal of this film is you're wrapping yourself in the flag of children, and I'm saying go see The Black Stallion instead. There's a film with little dialogue, so much better.
I'm not wrapping myself in the flag of children. You're wrapping yourself in the flag of the sophisticated film critic who's seen it all.
No, boredom.
At this point, I'm pretty sure Gene wants to bonk Roger on the head with a mallet. The argument is so big and dividing that they continue it at the end of the episode, and they're just as much at fighting odds as they were before. This is why I love rewatching these old reviews so much. These guys weren't afraid to express their opinions in detail.
Benji the Hunted is not 1/3 the film, 1/10 the film that the Kubrick film is, but you know that the same thing happens, that you review films within context. So it's not fair for you to compare those two reviews, and you know it, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
No, I'm not.
But first, before we get to the grand finale of this video, let's recap the previous 9 split thumbs. Number 10, Bogus. Gene thought it was an unbelievable and poorly thought out children's film, while Roger thought it was charming, and Gene was too harsh. Number 9, Rocky IV. Gene enjoyed the story and thought that the film had a great villain, while Roger thought it was a bunch of hokum nonsense. Number 8, Mulan. Roger thought it was one of the best executed Disney animated features in recent years, while Gene looked at it as a pale shadow of what had come before from the Mouse House. Number 7, Parents. Roger thought the movie was weird and subversive, but not in a way he could appreciate, while Gene bought the entire concept of the film and execution hook, line, and sinker. Number 6, Batman. Gene enjoyed the visuals, the performances, and appreciated how adult the movie's tone was, while Roger could respect the art direction. The story and Batman's own character disappointed him greatly. Number 5, Kids in the Hall, Brain Candy. Roger thought it was a bunch of brain-numbing, unfunny nonsense, while Gene thought it was a clever comedy with a lot good to say. Number 4, Congo. Gene thought it was a laughably bad adventure film, while Roger bought it as a feature that wanted you to laugh with it, not at it. Number 3, Blue Velvet. Roger thought that the actual material of the film was awful, while Gene saw it as a great look at the darker side of suburbia. Number 2, 2 in 1. Gene thought that Full Metal Jacket was one of the best no-holds-barred war movies in recent years, while Roger was surprised by how shallow he found it. Benji the Hunted. Roger thought it was a solid family film with some incredible outdoor photography, while Gene started yawning after the second repetitive chase sequence. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. The best Siskel and Ebert argument is... So after taking that long Benji Full Metal Jacket turn, what could possibly beat out those films' fist fights? Well, what about a review of a film that left the critics in literal shambles at each other, so much so that some people are still debating it to this day? Yes, the best Siskel and Ebert split argument is for David Cronenberg's Crash. Siskel leads this review talking about the film's controversy and the fact that it's been hit with the dreaded NC-17. A Cronenberg movie having controversy? I've never heard of it. Gene thinks the movie is more depressing than it is exciting. However, Roger disagrees, saying he liked it a whole lot more than he did.
It's a fascinating study of the way the mind works in connection with images that we connect with sex.
Roger, it can't. I'm going to review the movie and then I'll review your review.
Meta, Gene. Meta. Gene and Roger argue about whether they thought the characters were interesting. Both sides have pretty clear different opinions of the matter, and in classic split-take form, neither is going to budge, no matter how convincing the final argument is. Now, this whole ordeal might seem odd. After all, Ebert had a lot of criticisms about Blue Velvet, which had a similar risky type of vibe. So why was he so enthusiastic towards Crash? Well, aside from his differing opinions, I think with Roger, a lot of Crash's strength came from how fearless he thought the movie was. It's very evident if you read his print review. Well, that, and there was no Isabella Rossellini character for him to rally against. I appreciate Roger's work, but he was definitely in the wrong about that one. This is why Ebert could be such a great film critic. While Blue Velvet is an excellent film, Lynch was younger and much less assured with his intentions when he made it. Whereas with Crash, Cronenberg was already much older, and thus had no pretenses about going too far. While I'm still not 100% sure I agree with him, I think Ebert lays out evidence for his argument pretty well. Their review of Crash is the epitome of the perfect Siskel and Ebert clash. Gene took the movie at more of a cursory glance, while Roger saw more out of it, but sometimes couldn't completely get into the full details of why, and Gene took him to task for his supposed inaccuracies. This is why these two were so good together. Instead of always agreeing on everything, their differing approaches of what they wanted out of films made for some often entertaining and even great film arguments. It's part of how it was so hard to replicate that same kind of energy when they both eventually stopped doing at the movies. And we salute them for their work. I hope you enjoyed this video. This was really fun to make. Please remember to comment and like down below. Also, come back next time for another new installment of Daniverse. Until then, the video screen is closed.
It's Thriller Week on Siskel and Ebert at the Movies, and we've got three new ones.
And the movies, not at the movies.